Good morning, Europe. Welcome to the program. Our top stories for you this hour. Staff shake-up. The French president reshuffles his staff after video of his now sacked aide striking a protester went viral. And over in the Cube, our social media news desk.
Some breaking news this morning. Donald Trump ups the war of words with Iran, threatening Iran with consequences the like of which few in history have seen. We'll have the latest.
And some breaking news for you. A mass shooting in Toronto. One woman has died and 13 are injured, including a young girl. David versus Goliath. A man dying of cancer who blames a weed killer for his illness will testify against chemical giant Monsanto in the first trial of its kind. And Ozil calls it quits. The star German footballer says he no longer wants to play for the national team. We'll tell you why. Thank you for starting your morning with us. In our top story, French President Emmanuel Macron is facing the biggest political crisis since his government took office last year. The French leader has ordered a reorganization of his parliamentary office after footage of his aide Alexandre Benalla dragging a woman by the hair and hitting a protester during the May Day celebrations went viral. Well, critics have hit out at the president for failing to acknowledge the incident, and there have been suggestions it was even covered up. Well, let's cross over to our correspondent, Annelise Borges, who is in Paris for us. Annelise, it's really been a tough few days for Macron, hasn't it? What do we know so far?
Well, this is the most trying moment for Emmanuel Macron since he became president last year. It feels as though a massive earthquake has shaken the grounds of the presidential palace, and it has left Emmanuel Macron at a loss for words. Because, Tesa, one of the most striking things about this crisis is the fact that Emmanuel Macron has yet to talk about it. We haven't heard from the French president on this issue at all. We do understand that he has been busy at work this weekend. He has held several crisis meetings, including one with his prime minister, another one with his interior minister, Gérard Collomb, who's expected to be questioned in parliament later today. But we have yet to heard from Emmanuel Macron on this issue. We know that the president has ordered that cabinet reshuffle. He wants his personal office completely re-examined. He wants to avoid a repeat of what has happened. And we know from his inner circle that Emmanuel Macron has condemned the actions of Alexandre Benalla. He said that what he did was unacceptable and that there will be no impunity in this case.
And at least when Alexandre Benalla was fired, I think the reaction was, oh, finally Macron had done that. But now there are actual charges on the table, aren't there? Can you tell us about what they are?
Absolutely. Alexandre Benalla has been presented with preliminary charges this Sunday, and they include multiple offenses. They include violence, interfering in the exercise of public office, and the unauthorized public display of official insignia. And that, of course, all those charges relate to that incident recorded on video on May 1st, when Alexandre Benalla is seen violently handling those protesters on May 1st during an event that he was authorized to participate as an observer. Alexandre Benalla was not authorized to handle those protesters that way, certainly not. And he was not even authorized to act as a police officer, which he is not. Of course, there are multiple questions now as to what exactly was the relationship between the French president and this young man, Alexandre Benalla, who's only 26 years old. How come the French president trusted him so much? What exactly was the nature of this relationship that started, of course, with Benalla as Macron's bodyguard during the presidential campaign? He was later absorbed into his office. He had a very prominent position in this administration. So there are multiple questions on the table now, and everybody really wants to know whether or not Emmanuel Macron will come forward and actually admit that he himself has made a mistake.
Indeed, it's looking bad all round for the president there. Thank you very much for that, Annelise Borges there in Paris. And with me in the studio to discuss this further is European Affairs journalist Stéphane de Vries. Stéphane, thank you for joining us in the studio. I think one of the questions that people really want to know is why did it take this long for Emmanuel Macron to even acknowledge the incident?
Well, I think he's really, really embarrassed by what happened because he is the one responsible for hiring Ben Allah. He says he wants to shake up his office, but actually he is the one who put this system in place. So he knows that he is at the top of these series of mistakes. Of course, it's very strange that he doesn't talk. He is a very avid user of Twitter. He tweets about 8 times a day, and now he has been completely silenced since last Friday when the story broke. So this already shows that he actually doesn't really know how to handle the situation. There have been a couple of crisis meetings, but there has been no official statement by the president. And of course, everybody in France is waiting. What will be the president's explanation?
In fact, it's already been called a deafening silence from the government. And how do you think this is going to impact his credibility moving forward, his popularity moving forward? It's been going down.
Absolutely. His popularity was already going down, but this will really worsen his case. Of course, also his credibility is here at stake. Yesterday, the government already decided to postpone the revision of the constitution, one of his most ambitious reforms. Now, this is not just a setback, it's actually a real humiliation. And of course, we have to look at the bigger picture. In Europe, Emmanuel Macron was seen as the savior of Europe, the leader, especially since Angela Merkel, the German chancellor, did not pretty well in the last elections. So I think a lot of political leaders in European capitals today will ask themselves the question, is he still going to be the leader of Europe, and what are we going to do if he's going to be in further trouble?
And I think what's important to raise is even within France, again, the government, there is a review of constitutional reforms have been put on hold precisely because of what's going on, and that is a big deal for Macron.
Absolutely. He wanted to change the constitution. That was already in his election program. So now this has been put on ice, and so what's next? Maybe other reforms are facing the same fate, and that would be very bad news because this country, France, really needs the reforms. It's doing badly. The economic situation is not very good. It's the only country of the 28 European member states where the unemployment is not going down. So Emmanuel Macron absolutely has to do something. But with this scandal, his strategy is completely, demolished, and he will have to find another way to, especially to come closer to his European partners, and it will be very difficult.
And looking at it from a slightly bigger picture, and maybe slightly philosophical as well. I mean, he's a president who is called lofty and out of touch. Do you think this incident actually reinforces those perceptions?
Yes, I'm afraid it will. He was already, of course, seen as the president of the rich, but the fact that he has not been talking about this for 4 or 5 days shows that he's more or less out of touch about what is really going on in his country. All
right, thank you for that analysis. Stefan de Vries there, thank you. Well, another breaking news story for you this morning. Donald Trump, he's tweeted a fiery message to Iran. It's a warning of dire consequences. Well, because he says that, Iran cannot threaten the United States. Alex has been following this story.
Tessa, it's no surprise really to say in 2018 Donald Trump has tweeted something controversial. But where this perhaps stands out is the tone and indeed the look of this tweet. Let's have a look. So this is directed directly to the Iranian President Rouhani, and it is all in capital letters here, the whole way through. And just some of the keywords: never ever threaten the United States again, or you will suffer consequences the likes of which few throughout history have ever suffered before. We are no longer a country that will stand for your demented language and violence. So be cautious, Donald Trump's swipe there at the Iranian president. So where did this come from? Why is Donald Trump really going for the Iranian president? Well, over the weekend, Rouhani gave a televised speech in which he said that America must stop pulling the lion's tail, referring to antagonizing Iran. Let's not forget Donald Trump pulled out of the Iran nuclear deal, a key achievement for Obama. And there's the threat now that Iran and Rouhani will face fresh US sanctions. So Rouhani is speaking to journalists and indeed to the cameras, saying America should know that peace with Iran is the mother of all peace. But then check out this phrase: and war with Iran is the mother of all war. So it is perhaps that comment that Donald Trump is seizing upon. Already people comparing this to his remarks on Kim Jong-un. Daniel Dale here saying this is the Iran version of fire and fury. Let's not forget Donald Trump just last summer threatened North Korea with fire and fury, the likes of which the world had never seen. So very strong words, this time focusing on Iran. So what are people saying about it? Well, the retired Colonel Morris Davis in America, former senior figure in the American military establishment, questions this "we" that Donald Trump is using in his tough talk, suggesting that Donald Trump's never served and actually questioning whether his grandfather left Germany to avoid serving. Obviously, that's his claim. But the point here, I think, is that many among the American military establishment seeing Donald Trump's tough talk as not being backed up with direct experience of military service. Just one more just to bring up for you. Jeffrey Lewis, who wrote a book about the possibility of nuclear war between North Korea and America. Let's not forget, last summer that did seem, many people were talking about it as a danger, a real danger we were facing. Well, he said he wrote a book about that, but this tweet is 100,000 times more absurd than anything he had in that book. But among Donald Trump's support base, let's not forget this kind of tough talk, tough tweet is the kind of thing they see as Donald Trump standing up to Iran, standing up in the face of what they would call Obama's weakness. So what do you think? Is the president standing up at last, or is he pushing us all towards a very difficult international situation? You can let us know using hashtag #TheCube.
That was an all-caps message. You don't see that quite often. Thank you for that, Alex and the Cube team. And now our breaking news story for you. One woman has died and 13 have been injured in a mass shooting in downtown Toronto in Canada. The shooting happened just after 10 p.m. on Sunday when police were called after reports of shots being fired in the Greektown area. A young girl is in critical condition. Now, police say that the shooter is now dead and victims have been sent to trauma centers around the city. We'll have more on this breaking story a little later in the program as and when we get more.
It's almost inconceivable these kinds of things can happen. We were so used to living in a city where these things didn't happen, and as we saw them going on in the world around us, that we thought they didn't happen here or couldn't or shouldn't. And I can just say to people that they should try to stay calm while the police do their job.
And still to come for you on Good Morning Europe, Theresa May goes on a European charm offensive as the new Brexit secretary calls the EU, quote, irresponsible for flagging risks of a no-deal Brexit. And a terminally ill cancer patient in California is preparing to give evidence in court against the agricultural pesticide producer Monsanto. More on all that after the break. Your top story on Good Morning Europe. The French president reshuffles his staff after a video of his now sacked aide striking a protester went viral. British Prime Minister Theresa May is deploying members of her cabinet across Europe on a charm offensive in the hope of getting EU leaders on board with her Brexit plans. Well, it comes as new Brexit Secretary Dominic Raab labelled the EU irresponsible for flagging the risks of a no-deal Brexit on citizens' rights. And speaking on British television, Raab accused the EU of trying to ramp up pressure on the country ahead of the looming final summit in October. Raab met his EU counterpart Michel Barnier in Brussels for the first time last week after former Brexit Secretary David Davis quit over Prime Minister May's exit strategy. The strategy remains controversial at home and abroad, with cabinet resignations that May's strategy doesn't go far enough and EU raising concerns over cherry-picking. And here's what Dominic Raab had to say when asked about the EU's warnings on citizens' rights after Brexit.
Well, what is my, legal and political position?
Well, I think that's a rather irresponsible thing to be coming from the other side. We ought to be trying to reassure citizens on the continent and also
Why
here.
is it irresponsible?
Well, I think they're trying to, in lots of different ways. And of course, neither the Commission nor the EU as a whole speaks with one voice. But there's obviously an attempt to try and ramp up the pressure, and that's fine.
Now, there's been an international rescue effort in Syria's southwestern region where members of the White Helmets, that's a volunteer group, were evacuated from the country. Alex has been following this story. Alex.
Tessa, many of the pictures we saw from Syria, from on the ground, were from organisations like the White Helmets. They are a volunteer rescue organisation. They're actually they've become known as the White Helmets based on the gear they wear, particularly the white helmet. And they went through the rubble, pulling out people and rescuing them. So they were supported and backed by a number of Western countries. Well, check out these pictures from overnight, released from the Israelis. We can just have a look at these for you now. We should be able to bring those up for you. If we can't, then I can say that here we are. They show you members of the White Helmet and their families being evacuated as Syrian government forces move in and recapture increasing amounts of rebel-held territory. Now, there was a fear for these families and indeed these individuals, members of the White Helmets, as you can see, being bussed out here, because of the Syrian government's assertion that they were terrorists because they were operating in largely rebel-held areas. Well, let's just show you on a map where all of this took place. Here is the Israeli-occupied territory, the Golan Heights, and it's from this province here that those buses transported the White Helmets and their families out of Syria. We obviously have Damascus up here and Daraa down here, where there's been a real push of Russian-backed Syrian government forces to reclaim territory lost in the civil war, and they have certainly been regaining that territory now. So this rescue effort, an international rescue effort, the Israelis won part of it, they're the ones who released the picture, has been praised from a number of sources. The UK Foreign Secretary, for example, Jeremy Hunt, had warm words about the White Helmet, saying this story was a glimmer of hope and a positive story. Penny Mordaunt as well from the UK's International Aid Department, saying very pleased UK with our friends. We've evacuated some of the Civil Defence Force, that's the formal name for the White Helmets, and their families to protect them from retribution. That idea that the Syrian government might have pursued these people for what they accuse them of as crimes and supporting terrorists. So that's the UK position on it. And let's not forget who these people are. Their social media account was lively throughout the whole conflict. They would be posting pictures of their volunteers through the conflict, through the debris, through the rubble, and obviously keeping people up to date with what they were doing, saying, for example, here, the rescue teams continuing operations in the aftermath of 3 airstrikes targeting residential areas. So they really were on the front line. Their death toll was not inconsiderate. These people died on the front line. But now there's a lot of questions about what next for these people. And indeed, among President Bashar al-Assad's supporters, there is still the view that these people supported terrorist organizations and were, if you like, a destabilizing feature in Syria during the war, something, of course, they reject, and indeed Western governments, European governments reject. But a lot of support for these people. Let's just bring up this tweet here from Christina Freeland. The White Helmets are courageous volunteers and first responders who risk their lives to help fellow Syrians. Our thanks to Israel, Jordan, US, UK, as I say, a multinational, international rescue effort, and Germany and other partners who've worked to get them out. There's also the suggestion that Canada, the UK and Germany, among others, will be those nations to take in these people and their families, to rescue the rescuers, as it might be seen. What are your thoughts on this story? You can let us know using #TheCube.
Thank you very much for following that story, Alex, and the Cube team. Now, a terminally ill cancer patient in California is preparing to give evidence in a trial against the herbicide producer Monsanto. In what is the first case in potentially thousands of its kind against the company, Dwayne Johnson maintains that it was the world's most widely used weed killer, Roundup, which caused his cancer. At the heart of the case is the scientific controversy as to whether or not the chemical is carcinogenic and if the company has been aware of this. Amid widespread public pressure, the European Union debated banning glyphosate earlier this year, but finally renewed its license for another 5 years. And with us now live for more on this is environmental toxicologist and anti-glyphosate campaigner Angeliki Lisimashu. Thank you very much, Angeliki, for joining us today on the program. I think, one of the things that we do need to point out that the WHO said that glyphosate is probably carcinogenic to humans, but then you have the U.S. Environmental Protection Agency, EU Chemicals Agency, and EU Food Safety Authority that said otherwise. So why are you still campaigning against glyphosate, considering all these?
Yes, good morning. First of all, because we believe that glyphosate can cause cancer, like the IARC said, that is probable carcinogen. And because we trust, IARC has one of the strongest conflict of interest policy. So the experts that came out with this decision were 17 scientists from 11 different countries, and they all had been examined to have no conflict of interest at all. And now, when we look into their analysis, we can see that the evidence that they present, they're very valid. And then when we compare the analysis to what the European agencies did, we see that many of the effects that the IARC, let's say, took into account in Europe, or EPA as well, they dismissed them either as non-relevant or they gave some other excuses. So we actually do believe that there was a maladministration in the process of carcinogenicity.
Okay, so basically you don't trust what the agencies have said, especially the European agencies have said. You don't trust that. Okay, I want to look at the trial today because it's the first one in what could potentially be a lot more. What kind of outcome do you hope to see out of this trial, and how will it impact your work as a campaigner?
Well, we do expect a thorough investigation that will examine all the scientific evidence. So it will come out with the same conclusion of being probable carcinogen. And we hope to will bring, of course, some justice, not to just this man, but to other victims that they have been reported similar effects due to the use of the products, glyphosate, but also other pesticide products. And yes, we hope that it won't influence just Europe, but the whole world to understand that this chemical is not as safe as its manufacturers want to believe.
All right. Thank you very much for that. Anyeliki Lisi Mashu, an anti-glyphosate campaigner, environmental toxicologist there. Thanks. Well, we did ask Monsanto for comment, and this is what they told us. It's important to bring this side of the story. They said more than 800 scientific studies, the U.S. EPA, the National Institutes of Health, and regulators around the world have concluded that glyphosate is safe for use and does not cause cancer. We have empathy for anyone suffering from cancer, but the scientific evidence clearly shows that glyphosate was not the cause. We look forward to presenting this evidence to the court. So that was Monsanto's statement, clearly the debate ongoing on whether or not glyphosate is indeed carcinogenic. Well, still to come for you on Good Morning Europe. Tens of millions of people are preparing to vote in Pakistan later this week after a campaign hit by violence and political controversy. And over in the Cube.
I'm a German when I win. I'm an immigrant when we lose. That's what a German footballer says. We'll have that story for you after this.
You're watching Good Morning Europe. Welcome back to the program. Now, a candidate in Pakistan's upcoming election was killed in a suicide bomb yesterday in the northwest of the country. Ikramullah Gandapur was the latest victim in a string of election-related attacks rattling the country in recent weeks that have killed at least 179 people. On Wednesday, tens of millions of people will go to the polls to vote in a closely contested national election that several militant groups are violently opposing. Let's go now live to Bangalore, where NBC South Asia producer Waj Khan is live for us. Waj, can you tell us about all of this election-related violence? I mean, it's been a lot so far.
Yeah, it's been a bloody campaign. The Pakistanis, however, are confident that because the attacks have not been in mainland Pakistan, but on the tribal and border areas close to Afghanistan, the turnout of around 110 million voters will not be affected. But the pace of violence is picking up. In the last 3 weeks, 200 people have died. 3 important candidates have been targeted, all by suicide bombers, claimed by the usual suspects, which is the Pakistani Taliban and ISIS. Now, the candidates were both pro-military and liberal. So Pakistan's partisan divide classically has been breached. All sorts of candidates have been targeted. But again, the military is confident, and even the surveys are confident that out of the 110 million voters who take to the polls, choosing between 4,000 candidates, and there's only 48 hours left for the elections, in mainland Pakistan, the turnout will not be affected by this violence. However, the candidates from different parties have been targeted, and that is not good news.
Yeah, and Waj, I mean, the military might be confident, but what about the people? Would they brave going out to go to the polls to vote because of all this violence?
Well, again, the mainland hasn't been affected. Most of the violence has been out in the tribal badlands close to Iran and Afghanistan. But in the major cities, and I've been touring up and down Pakistan, Karachi, Lahore, Islamabad, in the Punjab, which has the majority of the Pakistani voters' constituencies, people are charged up. Campaigns are ongoing. It's the last day of campaigning today. Rallies are rampant. There's all sorts of organizations, parties, corner meetings, dinners, fundraisers ongoing in the mainland. And as far as the 3 main political parties are concerned, the outcome for now is pretty popular. You see, yeah. Go ahead.
No, Watch, I just wanted to bring up another point. Amid all of this violence, there's actually one good point I'd like to bring up is the fact that women will now be able to vote. And in fact, it is a requirement that at least 10%, I believe, of women should be voting in the polls. Is that right?
There's not just legislation and recent mechanisms in play about encouraging women to bring out the vote, but there are also reserved seats. If you want to go out and zoom out and take a look at how the election will play out, there's 272 seats. There's 120 political parties. There's more than 4,000 candidates. There's 110 million voters. And it all boils down to, of course, the youth bulge, the young Pakistani voter who is under 30 and 64% of the voting population. That's around 60 million voters who are under 30. Of course, presumably half of them women. Now, Pakistani women have generally not voted in those huge numbers, but they are being encouraged. There's actually campaigns on social and mainstream media encouraging women to come out and vote. But out of all those parties, it boils down to the top three, which is the Pakistan Tehreek-e-Insaf, run by the cricketer turned playboy turned politician Imran Khan, the incumbent Pakistan Muslim League Nawaz, which is in trouble because it's just lost its leader, who has been incarcerated, and the Pakistan People's Party, run by the scion of the Bhutto dynasty.
Thank you very much for that, Waj. Unfortunately, we've run out of time there. NBC South Asia producer Waj Khan talking to us about election in Pakistan. Thanks. Now, 25,000 people took to the streets in Munich this weekend to protest the hardline immigration policy of the Christian Social Union, or the CSU. March organizers said in a statement they were demonstrating against the, quote, irresponsible, divisive politics, end quote, shown by the CSU at the top of the Bavarian government. Now, Poland have sent firefighters to Sweden in order to help tackle over 50 wildfires after unseasonably dry weather. A convoy of fire engines drove into Sweden across the weekend, joining French, Italian, German, Norwegian and Lithuanian forces, all aiming to quench the flames, of course. Now, Louise Brown, the world's first person to be born through IVF, will celebrate her 40th birthday this week. She'll be speaking later at a press conference ahead of an event, the IVF at 40, which will take place at the London Science Museum later this week. Born in 1978, not only did her birth cause a worldwide sensation, but it also sparked a controversial debate about the procedure, which has endured ever since. While exact figures for just how many babies have been born through IVF is still unknown, it's thought that the figure is somewhere between 6 to 8 million, with new arrivals every day. Well, joining me now to tell us more is Joyce Harper, Professor of Human Genetics and Embryology at the University College of London. Thank you very much for joining us on the program. Now, I think we see that figure 6 to 8 million IVF babies. We've come a long way, right? I mean, how far do you think IVF has to go?
Well, it's really unknown. It's been an amazing 40 years. And quite interestingly, when Louise Brown was first born, there was a lot of controversy and people thought that the technology was really going beyond what medicine should do. And 40 years on, as you've said, we've got 6 to 8 million children. My own 3 children were born from IVF as well. So the future, the next 40 years, there are many exciting events on the horizon, a lot around genetic testing. And it's really going to be an exciting time to see where the next 40 years is going to take us.
Indeed, exciting in science, but as it is with all these, with new things in science, there's a lot of debate surrounding this. And in Europe, that debate hasn't stopped. In some of the countries here, Poland is an example. I think this is still a hotly contested procedure. Where is the debate now?
Well, I'm part of the Nuffield Council on Bioethics working group on genome editing. We've just released a document last week that we've been working on for 20 months. And we've got a conference today. And this is something that could really change the face of fertility treatment, where we could actually edit the genome for those carrying genetic diseases such as beta thalassemia. So this is something that's really on the horizon. And there are many other techniques that could try and help people have a healthy family.
Yeah, and in terms of accessibility, I just want to ask you, does everyone have this equal accessibility at the moment, or is cost still a hindrance?
Cost is absolutely still a hindrance. In the UK, we aim to have 2 to 3 cycles for couples around the UK, but this is not uniform at all. The technique is expensive, and within Europe and the rest of the world, it really varies. Some countries funding even more than 3 cycles, and some countries funding none at all. So we really have a huge discrepancy, and that's something that the UK is certainly working on, trying to make this equal access so that those that need to have fertility treatment can indeed have it and have their much dreamed for family.
All right, thank you very much for your insight there. Joyce Harper, Professor of Human Genetics and Embryology at University College London. Thanks. Well, we have a lot more coming your way. All of your top stories, including more on that pressure that Emmanuel Macron is facing over that video of his aide striking a protester. And as the 22nd International AIDS Conference gets underway, we're asking why in some places that epidemic is still going up. And German footballer Mesut Ozil will tell you why he controversially said he doesn't want to play for Germany anymore. But before that, we'll leave you with today's no comment from Nicaragua, where protesters for and against President Daniel Ortega took to the streets on Sunday, that is, to protest against controversial welfare cuts. Your top stories on Good Morning Europe. Staff shake-up. The French president reshuffled his staff after video of his now-sacked aide striking a protester went viral. Breaking news this morning, Donald Trump threatens Iran with, quote, consequences the likes of which few have suffered before, end quote, as the war of words between Washington and Tehran intensifies. And Ozil calls it quits. The star German footballer says he no longer wants to play for the national team. We'll tell you why. Now we have some other breaking news for you, and we will have the update of that from Alex and the Cube team. They're following this story very closely. Alex.
Tessa, breaking news this morning from Toronto in Canada. Reports of a mass shooting. And we have the video, the dramatic moment where somebody filmed the gunman, and you can hear the gunshots. Let's just bring that video to you now. We can have a listen in for the gunshots in the background. Okay, so there's currently on there you can hear the gunshots through the window. This is a user who described the scene. They were there watching a film on a Sunday night when they heard these gunshots outside. The user here saying they were terrified. Obviously, a swear word we've blanked out at the top of their tweet here. The shooting on Danforth, that's the neighbourhood where this took place in Toronto, happened right in front of my place. I was watching a movie and all I heard was gunshots. I don't feel safe in Toronto anymore. The police have given us an update. Toronto police tweeting that a mass shooting has indeed taken place. 14 victims were shot. At least one woman has died. A girl is in a critical condition. And the gunman as well is no longer active and is dead, but not included in those victim figures. So as yet, no confirmation about who this gunman was or what their motive was. At the moment, we do not know that, but we do know some of the numbers involved here. The mayor of Toronto tweeting that a despicable act has been unleashed upon the people of his city tonight. And Arcade Fire, the band, were performing in Toronto, also tweeting their thoughts, saying, we just got off stage in Toronto and heard the news, sending all our love to those affected. We'll have more for you on this story as it develops. Tessa.
All right, thank you for bringing us that update, Alex and the Cube team. Now, critics have hit out at French President Emmanuel Macron for failing to acknowledge or act quickly enough on footage showing a former security aide beating a protester during May Day celebrations. In a major scandal which could have serious consequences for his presidency, the French leader has ordered a reshuffle of his office. And joining me is European Affairs journalist Stéphane de Vries. Stéphane, again, thanks for being in the studio with us. The question again is, why did it take Emmanuel Macron so long to even acknowledge the incident?
Well, actually, he hasn't even acknowledged it officially. What we've heard about the staff reshuffle is just what sources have told us. So he still has not expressed himself. He has not tweeted at all, which is also remarkable because he's a very avid user of Twitter. On average, he sends about 8 tweets a day. He has been silent since Thursday, since the scandal broke. So the big question is, why is he protecting his former bodyguard? Because he was aware of the facts already the day after the bodyguard assaulted the demonstrators in Paris. So it's a very strange situation. It's without a doubt his biggest political scandal, and it will absolutely be damaging for the future of Emmanuel Macron.
Yeah, indeed. Do you think he can recover from this?
Well, it will be very difficult because he has lost a lot of credibility. Yesterday, the government already decided to postpone the revision of the French constitution. Now, this was one of Macron's most ambitious reforms, and the fact that the government decided to put it on ice is not only a setback, but it's actually humiliation. And more reforms could face the same fate. We should remember the fact that Macron was, of course, elected on an agenda of reforming France, bringing back France again on the international stage. He has been seen as the leader of Europe. Now, what's been happening in the last couple of days is a very serious setback, of course.
Indeed. We will be watching this closely. Thank you for that analysis, Stefan de Vries. Thanks. Now, the 22nd International AIDS Conference begins in Amsterdam today amid warnings from experts that the epidemic risks coming back and spiraling out of control. Though death rates are falling, rising populations in hard-hit areas and funding problems have hampered efforts to control the illness in recent years. Now there are urgent calls on how the disease is treated and controlled. So in new data released by the United Nations AIDS program, there are 39.7 million people worldwide living with HIV. Though new HIV infections have been reduced globally by 47% since the peak in 1996, women, sex workers, and men who have sex with men still account for the 47% of new infections globally. Well, joining us live now is Dr. Linda Gale Becker, President of the International AIDS Society. Thank you very much for joining us on the program today. Clearly, looking at the numbers, we've come a long way, but the epidemic is far from over, isn't it? What else still has to be done?
Well, Tesa, thanks for having me. That's absolutely right. Whilst we've made terrific progress, particularly the report tells us 22 million people on treatment, there are still at least 50 countries around the world where infections have actually been increasing. And clearly we're nowhere near epidemic control if we still have incidents on the rise. Particularly in our sites is the Central Asia, Eastern Europe region, where we've seen a 60% increase in infections.
Yeah, so why is there such a discrepancy? I mean, where is the problem?
Well, I think, there has been a lot of focus on treatment, which I think is absolutely correct. But we're asking the world to once again re-look at prevention. Prevention is really important for any infectious disease. And we now have tools that we can deploy to make sure that people don't become infected. And we need countries to really put resources, effort, energy, and policy decisions into getting prevention scaled up.
All right, and just very quickly, we don't really have much time. Who is most at risk at this point?
Well, we call those populations key populations, and they include, as you say, men who have sex with men, people who sell sex, and people who use and inject drugs, as well as many other vulnerable populations who can't access services because of stigma or policy.
All right, still a lot to be done there. Thank you very much, Dr. Linda Gale Becker, President of the International AIDS Society. Thank you.
Thank you.
And still to come for you on the program, Euronews travels to Afghanistan to hear how the government is fighting terrorism by tackling illiteracy. And over in the Cube,
we have the reaction as a German football star quits the national team, citing racism and discrimination. But first, a short break.
Your top story on Good Morning Europe. The French president reshuffles his staff after a video of his now sacked aide striking a protester went viral. Now, after a series of suicide bombings in Afghanistan throughout 2018, questions have been asked about the role of education in tackling extremism. Euronews joined the Afghan Minister of Education, Mirwas Balki, at Malala High School in Kabul to see what more can be done. Euronews correspondent Louise Miner reports.
In January, the Afghan capital witnessed a suicide attack unlike any other. The Taliban filled an ambulance with explosives and detonated it, killing 103 and wounding 235 people. Malala High School is an all-girls faculty and is 10 metres from where the blast took place. The school principal, Shafika Ahmadi Vardak, presented the Minister of Education, Mirwaz Balki, with fragments of the blown-up vehicle. Her account of that day is shocking and disturbing. So I saw a hand that had been cut off but was still moving. Even now when it's stormy, there are trees on the other side of the building from which hats, boots and body parts fall to the ground. You see, the Afghan people came back the next day. Even though they were afraid, they returned to work. Our reporter Masood Imani Kalasar asks, what do we do about the Taliban? Do we make peace or fight violence with violence? Some government elements in our region are exploiting uneducated people. They are responsible for the murder and bloodshed. Our reporter asks, would boosting literacy put an end to suicide attacks in the country? 100%, 100%. According to a UN report released last year, over 900 children were killed in 2016 while on their way to and from school. On Bloody Saturday in January, Malala School was mercifully closed. Compared to boys, the education of girls is a serious problem. Girls want to finish high school and go to university. But we don't have enough schools in the country. Our reporter Masood asks, with so much instability and insecurity, how can we expect students to study? Frankly, the people of Afghanistan are very brave. Despite the different kinds of threats we face in this country, among our people there is very much a thirst for education. Our reporter asks, why, as Minister of Education, do you need to be accompanied by armed bodyguards? It's a rare scene in many countries, let alone in a high school. What I do and what Mrs. Vardak does is no different to what a soldier does on the front line. And warmongers are always looking for ways to eliminate me. So I have no choice but to surround myself with bodyguards so we can fight ignorance. On April the 30th, 4 days after this report was filmed, there was another suicide attack killing 9 journalists. Fighting continues as on Sunday 2 children were killed and a third critically wounded. It's after a bomb in a rubbish bin exploded in Kabul. Louise Miner, Euronews.
And still to come for you on the program, star German footballer Mesut Ozil says he no longer wants to play for the national team. We'll tell you why. That's after the break. You're watching Good Morning Europe. Welcome back to the program. Our next story, in a surprise move, the Arsenal star Mesut Ozil said he no longer wants to play for the German national team. He cites racism and discrimination. Well, Alex has this story for you.
Tesa, it was in a tweet last night that Mesut Ozil said that he was no longer keen to play for the German national team. Let's not forget they've had a bit of a rough time recently, Germany crashing out of the group stages of the World Cup. But what really sparked this particular tweet was this photograph from a few months back. And it shows Mesut Ozil here stood next to President Erdogan of Turkey. Now, Mesut Ozil, he has Turkish ancestry, and he says this photograph is about going back and exploring his Turkish heritage. Critics jumping on it, though, and accusing him of no longer being, not really being German, and also of playing politics when he himself is a footballer and should be above that. So Mesut Ozil saying that actually he started to experience a great deal of discrimination after this. He stayed silent on this photograph. There's a lot of talk about it. He stayed silent until now when he has finally quit. He issued a long and lengthy statement. This is it here. Let's just pull up a key quote from it, though. And this perhaps sums up his whole perspective on this. He says, "I'm German when I win, but I'm an immigrant when we lose." And this is Mesut Ozil sort of striking back at the critics. It's really got a lot of people talking this morning. The president of Jordan's Football Association this morning saying that this is a loss for Germany and that people should respect Mesut Ozil as an athlete, that inclusion, equality and anti-discrimination is what is most important between athletes and fans. Other people, though, suggesting that maybe Mesut Ozil is overplaying the race card. This is obviously a controversial view, but it is out there. Mika Sprick here saying, I live in Germany, I don't look German, and I have a foreign background, but I'm not experiencing this racism here. So a lot of people talking about it this morning, but Mesut Ozil, the key thing, finally breaking his silence on this photograph, this contentious photograph, saying that now he no longer wants to play for Germany. What are your thoughts? You can let us know using #theCUBE.
Interesting debate again. Thank you, Alex and the CUBE team. And thank you for joining us in Good Morning Europe. Do stay with Euronews for all of your top stories. And we'll leave you with today's No Comment from Paris, where more than 700 retro and vintage cars were driven around the city yesterday for the 11th edition of the Traversée de Paris Estival Parade.